Well, good morning again. Good morning. The late great comedian Bob Hope was accepting a plaque at an award dinner. He listened as many contributions to humanity were expounded upon, and when it was his turn to speak, he said that he had stopped letting such honors go to his head. I just got a call from a fellow who said I'd been named Man of the Year by his organization. Because I was America's most outstanding citizen, Hope said, their greatest humanitarian, and so forth, it was going to be the biggest dinner, biggest civil reception ever. I told him I was sorry, but I was going to be tied up that night. There was a short pause, and then the caller said, "By any chance, would you have Red Skelton's phone number?" An Episcopal priest was asked by a high school class in Cambridge, Maryland, to deliver the graduation address. Afterward, he spoke of the invitation as one of the truly significant moments of his ministry. Little did he know that students made the selection by picking a Sunday and attending a number of churches. Their purpose was to time the sermons. The minister who gave the shortest sermon was chosen to deliver the graduation address. Some honor. Author and radio preacher John MacArthur was watching an MTV documentary some time back entitled The 7 Deadly Sins. Because those 7 sins, pride, covetousness, lust, anger, envy, gluttony, and sloth, are standard fare on MTV, MacArthur wondered what the documentary would say. It turned out to be vintage MTV, a montage of celebrity quotes, movie takeouts, man-on-the-street interviews, one-liners, quips, and witticisms. But in one sense, it was an enlightening program, says MacArthur. It revealed most clearly the profound moral confusion of our culture. Rap singer and talk show host Queen Latifah was asked about the sin of pride. "Pride is a sin?" she responded. "I wasn't aware of that." Actress Kirstie Alley added, "I don't think pride is a sin. I think some idiot made that up." Rapper and actor Ice-T echoed the same idea. Pride is mandatory. That's one of the problems of the inner city. Kids don't have enough pride. Interesting. One of the basic teachings of Scripture seems to be totally out of touch with the values of our modern culture. Consider this great verse from Micah. "He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." I think we'd be in trouble if we put this verse up to a vote today. Who wants to walk humbly? Or take this verse from the Sermon on the Mount. "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." If you try being meek in today's world, you will surely pay a price. Or how about this passage from 1 Corinthians? "But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not, to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him." According to the Bible, there is something to be said for being humble. There is something noble, something saintly about being meek. Even though such attributes are out of style in our current culture, our scriptures praise those qualities. But before we get into the virtues of humility and meekness, we need to add a qualifier. Being humble does not mean being a doormat. There are a lot of people who are taken for being humble just because they have back trouble. They have no spine. They're not humble. They're simply cowards. And that's not the kind of meekness Jesus was praising. If Jesus had been meek in the sense of being timid, a pushover, a Casper milquetoast, he never would have ended up on a cross. Jesus was a strong man, a man of conviction, who did not let others intimidate him. So there is a sense in which rap star Ice-T is correct. Many young people and adults as well do need more pride. That is, they need a healthy sense of pride that allows them to stand up for themselves and for their convictions and motivates them to give their best. We have seen a concentrated effort in our schools over the past couple of decades to raise our children's sense of self-esteem. And for the most part, that's a good thing. People without the right kind of pride will never be able to serve Christ effectively. They will never make effective witness for their Lord. Who will be won over by a whiny, apologetic, timid testimony? Such people are more to be pitied than to be emulated. No, that's not the kind of meekness, the kind of humility Jesus was talking about. So let's look at the kind of humility that Micah and Paul, and most especially Jesus, were calling for. First of all, we need a humility that allows us to do what needs to be done without the reward of recognition. There's an interesting article in Life magazine some time back. It was about Dan Dyer, a maintenance man for Roper Hospital in Charleston, South Carolina. Until 1989, Dan had been responsible for the hospital heating and air conditioning for 8 years. And yet the hospital staff was oblivious to Dan's existence. Dan was usually out of sight in the boiler room or some such place, and his contribution to the healing of the sick and hurting people just wasn't all that obvious. Then, in September of 1989, Hurricane Hugo hit Charleston. Electricity went out all over town. Roper Hospital was reduced to a system of backup generators, and for some reason, the diesel pump for generators was not pumping the needed fuel to run them. That threatened to leave a large hospital and its intensive care unit with no electricity. It was in the midst of that crisis that Dan Dyer made 5 trips out into a hurricane to hand pump diesel fuel back to the small tank that fueled the generator. Every trip through the high-velocity winds, water, and crashing debris was a risk of his life. But he did it in order to safeguard the lives of the patients in the hospital. After that night, nurses, the hospital administrator, and even the governor of the state knew who Dan was. Dan Dyer became a bit of a celebrity and was recognized from that moment on as the man who keeps Roper Hospital running. It's ironic, isn't it? For 8 years, Dan Dyer faithfully performed functions vital to a large hospital, but until a crisis occurred, the other hospital personnel didn't have a clue as to who he was. I think some of you know how that feels, right? We have people in this church who work behind the scenes just like Dan Dyer. These backstage people keep our church running. They work with our children and our youth. They count our money. They shovel the snow in the courtyard and mop the floor in the fellowship hall and pick up the flowers for our communion table. What if they refuse to serve because they didn't receive recognition? What if they refuse to serve because they don't see their names in lights? But they do serve, not for recognition, but because of a sense of commitment. They are humble people in the best sense of the word. That's one kind of humility that all of us need. But there's another. We need a humility that will allow us to be truly grateful for the things that we have. How often have we taken things for granted? Danny E. Bush, in his book, Invitation to the Feast, tells about a cousin and an aunt of his who had a childhood dream come true. Both of these women were born in a rural area near Spartanburg County, South Carolina. As children, it was a real treat at Thanksgiving and Christmas for them to receive an apple, an orange, or maybe some stick candy. Times were hard, but there was an abundance of family love and an appreciation for even the simplest of gifts. On their South Carolina farm, they had apple, peach, and fig trees, but these ladies had never seen an orange tree. After many years on the farm and in cotton mills, this cousin and aunt retired. They had looked forward to going places they had never been and seeing things that they had never seen. One of the things they wanted to do was to go to Florida to see oranges growing on trees. And finally, they got together with other family members and drove down to Florida. When they approached the first orange grove, they stopped the car. The grove owner gave them permission to look at the oranges and to pick a few. Those retired ladies acted like children in that Florida orange grove. They were, at long last, able to see in person the trees from which came the oranges they had delighted in as children in South Carolina. In that grove, they thanked God for oranges. They also thanked God for their health, that even in old age enabled them to travel to see oranges growing on trees. Could you find delight in such simple pleasures? As a people, we are richer than we have ever been before. But are we happier? Are we more content? People today are more apt to be frustrated by what they don't have than to be grateful for what they already do have. Oh, the joy of true humility. Truly humble people recognize that all of life is a gift, and so are able to delight in even simple pleasures. But there's one more type of humility we need. We need a humility that will allow us to put our trust in God. Here's where pride truly is our deadliest enemy. It causes us to put our trust in ourselves rather than in God. John Claypool tells of a missionary who went out years ago to teach in a school in China. She had begun the whole venture with a deep sense of God's calling. However, in the long voyage over the Pacific by boat, all kinds of fears began to crop up. Just like Peter, who had begun in confidence, but then took his eyes off Christ and let the winds drive him to terror, she too was beset by anxieties. How will I provide for myself? Will I be able to learn the language? What will be the response of the people? One night she went to sleep, deeply troubled by all these uncertainties, and she had a vivid dream. It was as if she were standing in the middle of the Pacific Ocean all by herself, with nothing but a 2x4 supporting her on the surface of the water. In that condition, a voice said to her, "Start walking to China." She answered back, "But I can't. I'm not able to walk on water. If I leave the secure standing place, I will surely drown." But the voice insisted. "I said walk. Start walking toward China." With fear and trembling, but in obedience, she lifted her foot and put it forward. And just at the moment that it was touching the surface of the water, another 2x4, like the one on which she had been standing, appeared out of the depth. Every step she took was met by supporting emerging 2x4s from the deep. She awoke with a new sense of confidence and trust in God. At times in our lives, all of us will be in deep water. At such times, where will we put our trust? Will we put it in our keen intellect? Will we put it in our robust health? Will we put it in our stocks and bonds or the equity in our home? There may come a time when all of these will fail us. But if we put our trust in ourselves, our accomplishments, our possessions, our investments, there will come a time, regardless of how much we have accumulated, when we will stare into the darkness and feel the waters of defeat and death rise around us. But if we put our faith in God, if we confess that our strength and our ability are inadequate, but that God's strength and God's ability will never fail, then we will discover why the humble and the meek of this world are blessed. Christian humility is not cowardice. It's not a summons to be a doormat. Rather, it's an invitation to work behind the scenes in endeavors greater than any of us could ever accomplish on our own. It is an invitation to appreciate the simple blessings in life. And it is an invitation to trust God, whose strength will never fail. Will you please pray with me? Oh God, we are far too often influenced by what others think of us. We often pretend to be either richer or smarter or nicer than we really are. Please prevent us from trying to attract attention. Don't let us gloat over praise on the one hand or be discouraged by criticism on the other. Nor let us waste time weaving imaginary situations in which the most heroic, charming, witty person present is ourself. Show us how to be humble of heart like you. Amen.